Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you to South Summit for bringing us the opportunity to be here. I have to say I was proud when Marwan and Sarah told me that South Summit wanted to do a panel about product design, because for the last decade, it looked like really we're out of fashion. Only digital and service design were relevant, no? I think today we have great panelists. I mean, we are all designers here, working in different industries. I would like to make a brief introduction. I mean, Nina Warburton, she's a designer, and she has been working on a design consultancy for many years, and now she's leading Philips eHealth home appliances, and she can introduce a little bit more later by herself. Rod White, also industrial designer, and working for more than 25 years for Philips, and now he's leading TV and audio. Michael Smith, he's also a designer, and he's working for Dell for the last 12 years, and well, he's fully responsible for all the commercial products from Dell. And Daniel Shubert, last but not least, he's also a designer. We graduated together from our center, and he's leading a division at Vodafone since more than 15 years, I think, where he takes care of all the devices and customer experience that is coming out of Vodafone. So I would like to launch a first question to you all, and feel free to, about what do you think is good design?
Who wants to start? Start, Michael.
You want me to start?
Yeah, go on.
Is this thing on? What is good design? I think that the other question is, what is bad design? The opposite of that. For me, and I guess throughout my career, good design has been when you're meeting your end users' expectations, exceeding their expectations, actually, and you're creating a connection emotionally to a product experience or software experience, and you're delivering bottom-line results for your enterprise. So that's my quick answer, I should say.
Yeah, I'd like to, just to build on that, it's absolutely the same for us at Philips. When we start, ultimately, it's about making life better for our consumers and for people every day. At the end of the day, if you don't meet the needs and exceed the expectations of your consumers, then you're nowhere. Of course, at the same time, we have to make money for the business, but it's also about a higher purpose as well. So it's also about that making life better, making the world a better place, and really using design to intervene in a way that has a positive impact or a positive outcome.
I would say, just to add on from the Philips perspective, from the consumer electronics world, good design is very much about understanding context, so where the product's getting used, adding innovation where it can be best appreciated by the user. And ultimately, it's also about no unnecessary decoration. So as a design team, we try to make the best possible experience, but with all the parts that are needed and no more.
Yeah, maybe to build on top of that, I agree with everything that was said, obviously. I think there's another element in the equation, which is brand. The design, the tangible hardware in particular that you give to people to deliver a service or whatever you might do, that actually tells a story about your brand, who you are, what you stand for, and what attributes you want to deliver. And that can be really, really strong, particularly in today's world, where we're so service-driven and where the product doesn't necessarily communicate its function anymore as it used to.
And in that sense, I mean, you mentioned before, I mean, it goes beyond the aesthetics, no? What's the balance between aesthetics, functionality, but I would say also between the strategy of the company?
Well, I would say by now, on average, all in my area of the industry, all main brands have got good design. So there is no such thing as terrible design in consumer electronics, because everybody's looking at the same websites, referencing the same trend documents. So I think to lift your brand and understand the position of your brand is intrinsic to what Daniel was saying. You have to understand what your brand values are, push them through the design, and then the combination of the usability and the function and the usability are hand in hand.
Yeah, so from my perspective, the balance between aesthetics and functionality all comes together in the experience. So if you deliver a great experience to people, and it does go beyond the product. So it goes to how we talk about it, the expectation that you set, but the communication that you can deliver through a product is still a very core and tangible part of that overall experience. So they might have a service around it, you might have connectivity around it, but ultimately the thing that people hold in their hands, it has to delight them, it has to create some emotional connection with them, otherwise it just remains a functional object. And we do have those in our lives, but the things that really give us pleasure and can engage with us emotionally are the things that bring that experience into a really positive thing.
Yeah. I would say that, for Dell at least, we've gone through an evolution over the last 20 years, where we used to get into a lot of conversations around functionality or usability versus design aesthetic. I think to just kind of build on what Nina said, the design is not something you just put on a product. It is the product. It's the connective tissue all throughout the way the user experience is kind of brought to fruition. So we do spend a lot of time. We have our usability and UX team is bigger than our design team, but we all work in the same team. So we're always constantly looking how to simplify, but do that thoughtfully. We want to make sure that the experience is appropriate. There's a lot of times we get into debates over legacy-type features. Do you jettison those in the next generation, or do you need to wait 2 generations? So it's just really about striking a balance. And to use Rod's point about context, it really depends on, so for example, we do rugged computers, extreme rugged computing systems for research scientists, military, oil and gas. Those things are mission critical. If you try to jettison some of that functionality for the sake of getting slightly thinner or slightly lighter, you're probably going to create a very horrible experience. So anyway, that's kind of a quick answer.
Yeah, I think most has been said, but I think one critical piece for me in the equation is that product design is not just what the product looks like, it's how it functions, that's an obvious one, but it is that equation from the very beginning on who are you as a company, what do you want to deliver, what are you trying to solve, down to the point, how do you deliver it to a customer, how do we have aftermarket service. For example, one topic we have quite regularly is refurbishment. If you build a router, that thing is going to come back at some point. You need to take it apart, refurbish it, and be able to ship it out to a customer. Has nothing to do with the aesthetics of the product, but it's a super important piece for the logistics of the company. So that whole end-to-end journey that you have for the customer, but also internally in the business, is super crucial to have a great experience on both sides.
I'd just like to build on that a bit, because I think you've touched on a point that's really interesting about that whole end-to-end journey. And the refurbishment part, we have to start thinking about that right from the outset. You can't just think about the product as just the entity. We have to think about the whole value chain and the choices that we make about how the product might go together, or the materials that we use, or even the finishes that we use. What does that mean for the product at end of life and coming back into the value chain? Really understanding that whole cycle is becoming absolutely critical to what we do.
I would even add to that, we had the discussion yesterday slightly already, even down to the product planning and portfolio. We, for example, as a design team, are heavily involved in roadmap planning, where you even have debates, is that product needed? Do I need that granularity in my portfolio? Am I not okay with doing just 2 products versus 5 products? So that whole idea on how do you present your products towards the customer, how understandable is that? We had one term yesterday that I really liked, was the decision fatigue. We all know the problem. You want to buy a new, television set, you end up going to Google and Amazon, and you're just overwhelmed by the options that are out there. And if you're even overwhelmed by the options by a single company, then I'd say, well, you're doing something wrong as a company, because you're not giving your customer clear decision criteria on why he should buy product A over product B. And in today's marketing world, that sometimes is the tendency that you try to do something for everyone, and you end up with this huge amount of options that are not good for the business, that are not efficient, and they're confusing for customers.
Thank you. And as I was saying in the intro, I think in the last 10 years, probably, I mean, the customer experience, service design, digital has been really on fashion. And it looked like product was not that relevant. But I strongly believe that product design clearly gives a competitive advantage to many companies. No? And I would like to listen to your point of view. I mean, you're leading, that part. What or how is product design delivering a competitive advantage to your companies?
I think the training that product designers get, both in the university but also as they become professionals, is that they're very aware from an umbrella or a high-level position how structures can properly work, both on screen but also in reality, both from consumers, the full consumer journey of before pre-purchase, purchase, and using the product is very much intrinsic to the role of a designer to understand the best ways of creating innovative solutions. So of course user experience has been a buzz for the last 10 years and will remain so, but the role of connecting the user experience designers and product designers is our role in order to make a fully holistic experience that communicates the brand that we work for.
Yeah, so to build on that, we at Philips, we see design as intrinsic to the success of the business, and that goes right up to the exco level. They're incredible supporters of design, and design has been a part of Philips for over 90 years. So it's got a huge legacy, and it has a very strong seat at the table. I mean, Rod's been involved in a lot of that history. And what that does is it means that we're intrinsic to the whole process, and we start with the business right at the beginning of the value chain. When we're developing the value propositions, like Daniel says, when we're working on the roadmaps, when we're looking at the strategy, the role of design is clearly called out. And that's really important. And it's not just the digital and the service. Of course, they're there, but the product is still a critical part of our brand and a key brand touch point for us. So creating that delight and that expectation around that product is extremely important. And we have to be very careful that we don't, a British expression, throw the baby out with the bathwater. And we make sure that we preserve that craft and really understand what that means for us.
Yeah, I would just say, kind of Daniel mentioned before, this whole end-to-end go-to-market, understanding where design fits in that journey, and the influences you have down the line. When I came to Dell, I came because design is a equal seat at the table with engineering and marketing. We're actually probably a three-legged stool, if you will. Yes. And then we also have to very much understand supply chain, the decisions we make that impact supply chain, simplify thoughtfully to keep, we're all part of the roadmap process. So I think that's where the creative or the advantage, competitive advantage is. You have to have it, and it has to be thinking not only within the design team, but pervasive throughout the whole organization. So we're very much a multidisciplinary design team. So and everybody refers to everybody else as a designer, whether you're a software architect, a usability expert, mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, we're all designers. So that's how we approach it at Dell.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to say I'm actually almost quite allergic to that differentiation between UX design and product design. Because to be honest, it's all doing the same thing. It's solving problems, whatever they might be, and trying to find really good solutions that delight people. And if you look at all the buzzwords right now of design thinking and agile, this is stuff that has started 20 years ago in product design agencies. And yes, things have diverged a little bit, that sometimes it's more digital, sometimes it's more the 3D product. But I'm also convinced things will merge again. As soon as you get in VR and AR, well, you need to build interfaces in 3D again. So it is one and the same thing. And I find it more challenging to have business consultancies coming around the corner, trying to teach that creative process, even though they have no background in it. That's where I think the bigger challenge is.
Well, I guess a good example is Deloitte, Bain, all the big consulting, McKinsey, they've all acquired design firms and ingested them into their organization. So that just tells you
why it's important.
Yes.
Exactly. There's no doubt it's important. And actually, what's critical is that we stay really on top of our game as designers to really understand this new world that we operate in. The responsibility on designers is greater than it's ever been. And as we start to think about that whole value chain, we start to think about the end-to-end, we play a pivotal role, have played a pivotal role for years. It's becoming even more important to be the spider in the web, as it were, and speak the language of the other disciplines and really try and pull everything together around that end customer or end consumer, whoever is the receiver of what we create.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I have been in the industry for more than 20 years, and we have all been listening about customer-centric products, but I still find clients today that are product-centric. What's your perspective? How can companies move from a product-centric to a customer-centric approach?
I think, at least from a Philips perspective, it's always been the case that it's not a technology push, it's a consumer need that we're addressing. So I think also us, but most brands by now are aware that there is a full 360 experience of what that product experience can be. So if you stop creating shiny boxes because you have a technology inside and start creating experiences for consumers, understanding genuine needs and coming up with solutions that bring value to the lives of people by means of the shiny box with whatever's inside it, that's a completely different experience for the consumer.
So we actually recognized that we were starting to, as rules and regulations, privacy, blah, 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 get in place, we're starting to lose a little bit of contact with the real consumer. So we sort of started an initiative in design called Dare to Care. And we have sort of 3 pillars to that. One is that we call radical empathy. So this is really trying to get under the skin of the end user, really see the world through their eyes. You know, just looking at the world through someone else's eyes is a hugely powerful tool that everyone can practice every day in every situation. Then we talk about holistic care. So we talk about really understanding that the whole cycle of care around people's health and well-being. And then we talk about humanizing technology. So when we do bring technology to people, how do we make it relevant for them? How do we help them understand it? And how do we make it fit in with them and their lives? So those are the 3 pillars that we work against. And if we kind of keep those in mind when we're working, we ask the right questions and take the right steps.
Which actually is the beginning of sustainability, because then if you're creating real
Absolutely.
value, then there's a reciprocal growth that allows the consumers to experience it going forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just thinking back 16 years ago when I started Dell, we definitely were a product-centric company, without a doubt. And there's still pockets of that throughout we're a huge organization. But the thing was, we were always, when I first joined, we were designing, but the operations and logistics and how fast can I make a PC was the center point. It was about efficiency. We flipped probably about 6 or 7 years ago, I'd say, to be more user-centered. And we don't really care where the innovation comes from. Is that from a technology partner? Is it coming from engineering? Is it coming from design? But the key thing is we have now this phrase is that we see before we do. And that's about going out and talking to customers, taking an ethnographic approach to research and really understanding the question, being intimate with the question before you can create the answers. So that's how it's talking.
That's a great point.
Yeah, I think another really important point is also what type of company are you? I mean, there's a huge difference between a corporate environment versus a startup, where you might have completely different problems and different things that you want to move in a way smaller team. And I think one of the key drivers that for me is always exciting is design is capable of building visions. Design is capable of building something that could be. So you're doing a lot of hypotheses. You can prototype. You can create something that a whole company can understand as, let's say, the leading star where to go. Versus what you see a lot on the business side is rather looking at past numbers and then projecting those forward and doing a business plan on it. And I think that's the strength for any company to really take design on board and figure out what could be and where could you go.
Thanks. How do you think, how can design leaders keep their team inspired?
Design teams. Actually, well, personally, I've run teams in Asia and Europe for the last 15 years. And as a designer myself, I understand designers are pretty simple people. So if you give them the right tools and interesting projects and a good context, good coffee, then they're pretty happy. That's the baseline.
Okay.
If you give them the basics.
But inspiration?
But then the inspiration, I realize also that diversity of projects suddenly opens up the eyes of a lot of design teams who are crunching out this year's range of last year's products. And from a personal insight, over the last 2 or 3 years, we've been working with a few other different businesses in luxury goods. So basically, to find some space between our Philips brand and metal companies and audio companies who are experts in their own field. So basically, that became from an initial project idea into a partnership. Starts to bring stimulation from different industries into ours, and you end up talking the same language but from different viewpoints, and that's really inspired the teams over the last few years, which was much greater than we'd imagined.
Yeah, and I agree with Rod. You need to get the basics right, but I think also teams can be really inspired by a real purpose. That's a bit of a buzzword today, but really, if the company that you're working for has a strong vision of where it wants to go, a strong North Star, and we can all believe in that North Star, then that creates an enormous amount of energy. We just did a session where we opened up our design floors to all the different teams so that they could do what's called a Gemba walk, which is like where you go to the place where the work is done. And the amount of passion that was coming out of the teams and people talking about their work. And often it's a bit hidden away, but when people get the opportunity to express it and really show how they're contributing to that overall North Star and that overall vision, that's an incredibly powerful thing.
So you say designers are simple? Is that what you said? I disagree. I think we are not a simple group.
We're very emotional.
And I think that comes from the type of people that I look to hire are the number one trait is curiosity.
Yeah.
And so if they have an insatious appetite for knowledge and experiences and things of that nature, they're typically never satisfied. So that's the first thing. And then the word inspiration or to inspire someone, that's a pretty tall order. So how do we do that with our teams is really connecting their day-to-day work to the end purpose, I'll use your word. And just a real-time example, I was in Shanghai last week, and I took along 3 of my Asian design team members, and I had them do all the press events, had them do all the customer sessions, and they came away with, wow, I get to listen to the customers, point-blank range, saying, this is my problems, this is where I need your help, and then they go back to the studio, and they're energized and ready to go, because now they're connected to who they're designing for and why they're doing the work they're doing.
Absolutely, you need to connect them to the problem
Yes,
and connect them to the real
Yeah.
person that's going to use the product. That's super inspiring. Sorry, Daniel.
No problem. I don't think we need to go in that constant row. No, but I think what the two of you said for me is the key one. It is the purpose. Because interestingly, I mean, as a design team, you work with lots of parts in the business, so you meet a lot of different people. But I think designers, the reason why they went into that trade is because they're curious, they're creative, and they want to create something. So most of people I've always had in my teams have a huge intrinsic motivation. So I actually rather have to send people home early and kick them out of the studio than force them to work longer. But that only works as long as you have that purpose and they have the feeling they know why they're doing this and they can really change the world a little bit, because that's eventually why every designer kind of studies design. As soon as that gets killed and you realize the business does really weird decisions or kills off things that actually would have made sense, that's when your team motivation basically goes down the drain.
Okay. This event is related to tech companies and entrepreneurship and startups, no? How should tech companies address design in order to succeed?
I would say there is some tech companies or some banking companies or whatever have seen the trend of adding design to their skill set, and some have been guilty of applying it like lipstick. So then if you add it as something that you can have on your website, then the value is very thin. So I think if you're going to bring design into the board, for example, or into the way of working, then it has to be as part of a structural performance indicator application. So you need to ascertain that design is going to get you from here to there, and put roadmaps in place in order to prove that design can add value, and educate the whole company that this is going to be a plus rather than a unnecessary step. Yeah.
For us at Philips, it's benefit first. What is the benefit that this technology brings? A technology, so you have to understand the real impact that applying that technology in a certain way is going to make to someone's life. And if you can, and to do that, obviously you need to talk to customers, talk to consumers, talk to whoever's going to be the end user, and focus it around their needs, because even sometimes the way in which you might develop that technology or the way in which you might communicate it will fundamentally change depending on who that end customer or end user is. So I would say just get intimate with the people that are going to use it, and you probably can't go too badly wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I think the way I'd answer that question is really it's a partnership. So you have to be really deeply engaged with your business units, your supply chain, again, a full end-to-end understanding. And design has to be a feature, a part of the strategy versus something you add down the road, as Rod said. And that's how we've rearranged our org structure, is that design is a part of every business decision. We influence the roadmap, as Daniel said. We're always that annoying 3-year-old asking why. So that's, I think, that's how the tech companies can make sure they're successful, is make sure it's a required function, just like you have in finance, accounting, marketing, launch, PR, everything else.
Okay.
So
I think the important thing is, particularly if you talk smaller tech companies, is having that trust in that creative force on getting you further than you actually wanted to go in the beginning. The tendency you have in business is that people look at numbers and they want to measure everything. And I think we all went to the exercise in the business that we need to justify why we have so many people and budget and what's the return of investment. And to be honest, with design, it's close to impossible. You can make something up, you can always find some great models, but what it's actually about is to create a vision, to create a strategy, and to prototype. And I think particularly that prototyping bit for smaller companies is pure magic. You can have all the business plans, you can have all the stories on paper. If you mock something up, if you have an app you can play through, if you have a hardware model on the table, if you have a POS presentation, just something that gives you a feeling for this is what it's going to be, that is just such an amazing driving force for management, for the whole team, that it's an investment that's just beyond anything worth it. So I think having design at the top, helping to create that vision, and then obviously the implementation later on as well, that's absolutely key.
Well, I think we're running out of time. We had another question, but maybe the audience, they would like to make some questions to our panelists.
No time.
No time for questions. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you